Good afternoon. Atención. Oh, hello for all you Spanish speakers. So I'm Demi, for those of you who don't know me, and I've been asked to share with you what I've done with my life. But there's only going to be bits and pieces. So yeah. There'll be private interviews later if need be, but this is just for the general public. So let me start by saying that most of my life I worked as a nurse. And interestingly, I was raised in the Christian Science Church. And so if anybody knows about that religious belief, they don't believe in illness. And so when I showed up at Sunday school and said I was going to nursing school, the teacher just about fell out of the chair. And they wanted me to go to Christian Science nursing school. And I said, no, thank you. I went where my mom went, and it was the way I needed to learn, which was doing. Reading books and studying, because we went to the University of Pennsylvania along with the hospital where I trained, and I had to learn on the job, and it was a good training. And one example I had of, because I was working evening shift, we staffed the hospitals, and and I was in charge of 28 patients on the surgical unit. I was handing out medications. I was doing wound care. There was a man who was admitted with stab wounds to the abdomen, and he was unconscious. He was just sleeping. And I went in and looked, and all around his mouth was red. And I ran right out and called the doctor and said, you know, come see him. I think he's vomiting blood. In fact, the doctor came out and said, come here, and took me in, and he said, now come up here. Now lean over and smell that. It was wine. So that's what I'm talking on-the-job training. So after working in the hospital where I trained, I decided I wanted to go to the beach. And so Atlantic City is nearby Philadelphia, which is where I was in training. And so I went and worked at a children's rehab hospital right on the boardwalk in Ventnor, which is just outside of Atlantic City. And the kids were so strong, and they were so great, and it was a wonderful job. And I was a supervisor. Right away, I got put into supervisor positions. And the kids were wonderful. There was a boy that had cerebral palsy, and he would fall all the time, so we made him wear a helmet. And one day I went in to pick him up, and he goes, they ought to make these floors out of sponge rubber, which I thought was brilliant. Another thing, there was this young black man who was born with no legs, and he was there to get prostheses, and he hated them. And so in the afternoons, he would go out in a wheelchair, laying on his abdomen, and he had these wooden things that he put on his hands with a strap, and he would work his way down the boardwalk. He sounded like a horse. And people would give him money. He wasn't out collecting money, but people would give him money, and he'd come back, well, I got $19. And so that was good. But then I went back up to Philadelphia and worked at a Shriners Hospital, which was another beautiful thing. Those kids were awesome, and what the Shriners did for them, except for when they brought them down for parade, when the Shriners would all come in, they brought kids in on parade. I didn't care for that. But anyway, then I went to a regular hospital in the city, and that was enough. Let's get out of here. So a gentleman friend that I'd known since before nursing school bought a camper. It was an old van that was made into a camper, and he had a BMW motorcycle, which was nice. So we trailed that behind and went down and spent the winter in Key West. He was a respiratory therapist, and I, being a nurse, we could work at the hospital there, so we did that. And they put me right in ICU, and I'm like, I'm not an ICU nurse, and they're like, I said, I can read a straight line or a normal EKG, anything in between, forget about it. And they said, don't worry about it. Just call the nurse from the emergency room. And it was a peaceful, quiet. It was an emergency room mostly. And we would get patients in off of cruise ships sometimes. And then they would get picked up by helicopter and taken up to Miami. So when the summer came to Key West, it was our intent that we would continue a trip. And so we headed on out to go cross country with the intention of coming back. But, and the gentleman I traveled with was thrifty, which was good. And so oftentimes we stayed in truck stops overnight, which was fine. Because when the trucks left, we'd go in and have breakfast and then go in and use their shower room and their saunas. And I'm telling you what, the truck drivers have it nice. Anyway, we got to Seattle, and coming down the West Coast was a stop here, stop there, stop here, stop there. It was so beautiful. When we got to San Francisco, that was all she wrote. That was where we wanted to stay. And so I started working in a hospital there. And again, they made me a head nurse. Did I have gray hair? Yeah, I had gray hair then, but I was coloring it. My hair was curly. I straightened it. It should have been short. I had it long. Blah, blah, blah. And so at that hospital, it was difficult. The doctors were all about everything. I mean, it was their hospital, and whatever they wanted, that's what we had to do. One thing that I appreciated, it was a Jewish hospital, and so they redecorated the cafeteria, and on the main floor they put up a sign for everybody to know where the cafeteria was, except they put up Nasheria. And for people that don't speak Yiddish, that means dining somewhere. So they were like that. And so I thought, you know what? I've about had it with these people. And the visitors, forget about that. The daughter would come up and, Mother lost her dentures and her glasses and her fur coat. Like, okay, well, and it was that. And I just needed to throw somebody out of there. So I saw an advertisement on the television, Jack Tiano Bartending School, and I thought, 2 weeks, I can do that. And so I went to bartending school. I quit working at the hospital, and I put a note in doctors' little cubbies like we have here, and I drew the caduceus around a martini glass and let them know that I would, be a bartender at parties or anything. And so this one doctor wrote a whole dissertation in a doctor magazine about this nurse has gone and done, she's tired of lifting bedpans. I was tired of talking to people like you is what I was tired of, but, and I thought that was pretty funny. But anyway, so off I go to bartending school. 2 weeks, they had me hooked up with the union. And I got a call from the union president, who was a black man, who said, you know what, we need a white woman out at the racetrack. You want to go do that? And I was like, sure. But that didn't happen. I never heard from him again. I guess I wasn't excited about it enough. Anyway, I got a job in a bar called the Conference Room, and it was at the top of the bank building down in the financial district. And we had to wear clothing the color of the furniture, and we were supposed to be all but absent, just quiet service. And if we wanted a drink of water, we had to bend down behind the bar and get a drink, because we weren't supposed to be drinking anything, including water. I was like, really? So there was a place that I'd hung out in the Marina District in San Francisco, and it was called Danny's, Toilet by the Bay. That was what the locals called it. Anyway, it was locals, and it was iron workers, and they would come in there after work and drink beer and shoot pool and play the jukebox, and it was easy, and I really didn't have to throw anybody out. Well, that's not. There was one guy that used to come in every day all the time and just was so obnoxious and just nasty language. And one day I said to him, Alex, get up, go home, take a nap, and come back when you're done talking like this. Well, and out he went, and he came back in and said, wait, I forgot your tip, and put money down on the bar. I was like, okay. Anyway, so the ironworkers came and went, and there was one that was just so attractive. He had white hair and blue eyes and didn't drink. He drank either coffee with like this much sugar in it or Coke, and play the jukebox and give money to the guys that weren't working at the time. And I just really appreciated him, and he was fun. So one Monday I was at work. I worked 10 in the morning till 7 at night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, so I didn't have to open up, and I didn't have to deal with the guys at the end of the night. And so it was a Monday, and I was sitting outside beside this one young iron worker just having a cup of coffee, and he was having a beer. And I said, "Do you know that guy with the white hair and the blue eyes?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh my gosh, he is gorgeous." And he said, "He kind of likes you too. He's my dad." There he is. Isn't it? Isn't it? So I forgot to put him in the show. And I've blown right past the picture of me getting my nursing cap, and right past the picture of the camper that we went to Florida in, and the nursing uniform and the length of the skirt coming out of the hospital. And there I am tending bar. And yeah, it was just a neighborhood place. And so when he found out that I was interested in him, he asked me out to dinner, and it was right around Thanksgiving time, and he took me right in town to the Hyatt on Union Square, and there was a Christmas tree in Union Square. It was so romantical. And finally he said, and I was still tending bar, and he said, "Let me take you away from all this." And I said, "Okay." And so we moved in together, lived in Sin, and I decided I needed to go back to nursing again. I didn't want to tend bar. And so I went through an agency, and they would send me to hospitals, and I worked night shift because I wanted to see what was happening. And they would send me off to different hospitals. The most difficult job was in the Chinese hospital, because I don't speak any Chinese. But I did learn that, what was it called? There was you can help me with this, Jim. It was a scented oil, and the Chinese really use it a lot. And they said, put it under the person's nose that's distressed and upset, and I would just take a couple drops and rub it, and I'm not sure what was in it, but it worked. But I found a hospital that was in they called it the Mission District, and it was lower income, it was Hispanic people, it was drug addicts, it was people of the street. And actually, oh no, that's too late, yeah. It was, it was a good place to work. And the story I want to tell about my experiences there, aside from meeting Telly Savalas, who was just as obnoxious as he was on all of his movies. "What are you doing, babe?" It's like, "I'm being a head nurse. What are you doing?" But there was a Native American man that was in a room in the morning time, and I looked at his chart, and it said his name was OHN, and I was like, that's weird. But he's a Native American, who knows? So, excuse me. What had happened was the addressograph machine was missing the J. His name was really John, but OHN was what I knew. And so I went into him, and he was beautiful. He was sitting on the side of the bed, just looking out the window over the city. And I said, "How did you sleep?" "I've been up since the sun came up, but that's normal." I said, "You have an interesting name. What does OHN stand for?" He said, "Oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen." Wow. Early in the morning, too. Anyway, that was the story on that. And so, as you laugh with what I'm saying, that's what I've done with my life. I've done a lot of laughing, and laughter to me is really important. Anyway, it was while I was working at St. Luke's Hospital that I learned about hospice. I didn't even know anything about hospice. And there was a discharge planner, and she said, because I was going to the patients that had cancer and were in a lot of pain, and I felt very comfortable kind of being with them. And so she told me about hospice, and I said, okay. So I called a hospice thinking that I was going to have a certain number of patients and they were going to be mine and be on call 24/7. I didn't even think past going there and being with these people. And so I went to this organization and they said, no, you don't have to work at night. At first I started in home care and that was pretty horrible. But anyway, I kept wandering over to the hospice department and finally I got to work there. And the things that I learned and the people that I met, it was beautiful. In fact, this is one of the very first patients I met, and her son worked for the post office, and he would always be there when I would visit. And he asked me to sit with her, and he wanted to take my picture. I was reading her the 23rd Psalm, and he took my picture, and I wasn't used to having my picture taken, but yeah. And she died shortly thereafter, but it felt really comfortable to be sitting there and reading the 23rd Psalm, and she listened to every word. This woman had been a teacher in South America and was very firm on her knowing. I mean, she knew exactly what was important and what wasn't, and blah, 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 and she lived in a house all by herself. And she wrote this: death is personal, death is private. I go alone down the dark tunnel to the light. I shall be angry if there is no light, just darkness. Through all eternity, I shall be angry if there is no light. She was lovely. So I tried to work with her around her anger, but that's the kind of lady she was. And the thing that's important is being with people that are like that and listening to them. And she changed somewhat, but she was always that world-traveled, angry lady who was dying. And people are angry when they're dying because they don't want to die. Anyway, this little lady in the blue shirt was just a party, and that was a party that was happening. And the other lady is her daughter. And so she lived by herself in an apartment, senior apartment, and she was just so lively and so lovely. And she had cancer and she was uncomfortable, and her daughter wanted the doctor to come and give mom an injection to put her away because she was suffering. And the daughter worked at the Wildlife Foundation, and she said, you know, when injured deer come in, we just give them an injection and they go to sleep, and that's the end of that. Why can't we do that with mom? So our medical director came out and sat with her for almost an hour and talked with her about what needed to happen. And so what we did do was give her medication to make her be asleep. And he said, just give it when she wakes. And so she had a 24-hour caregiver, and if she woke up, they would give her this medication and she'd go back to sleep. After a while, she would wake up, sleep a longer time and wake up, and she said, I feel good, I slept. And if she woke and felt better, no medicine, let it be. She was medicated and came out of that in about 10 days and lived 4 or 5 more months after that. It was getting her through whatever discomfort she was experiencing, which wasn't just pain in her back. It was all kinds of other pain. And she woke up, and that's the party she had after the treatment. Yeah, she was a trip. And this lady, oh my, she was very well-to-do, lived in a hoity-toity apartment building downtown San Mateo, and had dementia and had cardiac disease, and had 2 daughters that never came to visit. She ended up with a caregiver around the clock, and she was accusing the caregiver of stealing her jewelry, and the caregiver noticed that she was flushing her jewelry down the toilet. And so there was that. But anyway, we decided it was her birthday, and we decided to take her out to lunch. And so she had a volunteer. The volunteer drove her out to the coast to this restaurant called Sam's Chowder House. And the social worker joined up, and I was off that day, so I joined up. And so she came into the restaurant, and the server came over, and it just so happened that the server was in nursing school. And so the lady said, yeah, I'm on hospice, and my friends here brought me out for a special birthday lunch. And so the server said, "What would you like to drink?" And she said, and I thought a Cosmopolitan at the very least, if not a martini. And she looked around and said, "I think I'll have a beer." And so she had a beer, enjoyed it, had a beautiful lunch, went back home. And when she died, the social worker and I went to her memorial service and talked about the day we took her out to lunch. And the daughters were just stunned. And they came over and expressed their gratitude that we would spend time with Mom. It turned out that Mom used a lot of prescribed drugs while the girls were growing up. And every time they came home from school, she was sound asleep on the couch. So they had their own issues. And we were like, I don't know why she doesn't like this lady. She's so much fun. Look at her. Anyway, that's the other side of the story. Here's another one, Myra. She lived in Half Moon Bay in senior housing, and this is a volunteer that she had, and it was her birthday, and the volunteer made this ganache, something or another cake, and brought it to her, and she celebrated, and she was gay, but she didn't refer to herself as that. She lived with an older woman who, a younger woman, who had promised to take care of her, and the younger woman up and died, and she was very distressed that she was left all alone. And so although she never said she was gay, it was apparent, and we loved her just like anybody would. She ended up going to one of the facilities, and because she was needing care 24 hours a day, and so she went into a facility for about 10 days, I guess. And as she came to the end, the social worker showed up and sat down with her, and she had never seen anybody, the social worker had never seen anybody die. And so I was there, the social worker was there, and the owner of the house was there, and the three of us stayed and were with her while she stopped breathing. And the social worker was really grateful, because usually we would get a phone call that somebody had died, and then it would be our job to go and confirm that they were really dead. We didn't get to be with people when they died. And so it was always a privilege if we were there at that time. Yep, Myra. She built her own sailboat, by the way, and sailed in it when she was younger and healthy. Now this, Medicare is very specific about the information they need to ensure that they're paying for somebody that really needs to be on hospice. And so documentation by the nurses, the social workers, everybody needs to be very specific to indicate that people are getting worse. They can get worse very slowly, but it behooves the nurse to make sure that that's a note. This guy wasn't getting better, but he wasn't getting worse. And no matter what we wrote, it didn't work. And so he was coming off of hospice. And he was so cute, and he lived by himself. And so I got the social worker, the home health aide that came and bathed him, and I went and bought that tassel and made him a hat. And we went to the door, knocked on his door, and we said, "Henry, you're graduating today." And he let us all in, and we had a party. And he was happy with that. And I mistakenly left the oxygen concentrator in his house. I didn't call the company to come and take it away. And 2 weeks later, he called me and he said, "I can't breathe, so I put on the oxygen." I was like, okay, good. Glad it's still there. And he ended up going to the Veterans Hospital and died there. But he was a lot of fun. He ate the same thing every day for breakfast, the same thing every day for lunch. And he had a girlfriend, and she'd come over, and they'd go out to dinner sometimes. But, yeah, Uncle Henry. Now then, this was a friend that I had sort of adopted, as many other people in Half Moon Bay had done. He graduated from Half Moon Bay High School, and he decided he wanted to live on the street. His whole family moved to Southern California, and he stayed there. And his name was David, and he lived out behind the Safeway parking lot, back in the trees. And he was funnier than all get out, and twice he ended up in the hospital during the winter. And so his pit bull, Spanky Jubilee, became my responsibility, and I got him to the pound, and they would keep him for a month. And then after that, Spanky needed to get out of the pound. And so Spanky stayed at the pound, and he was in the hospital, and I went to visit him, and he picked up the remote for the bed, and he said, "Watch this." And he pushed a button, and the head of the bed came up, and I was like, wow. And then he pushed another button, and the knees came up. He said, "This is amazing." I said, "This is what's inside. You know, you're outside. We have these things inside." And then he picked up the TV remote, and look at this. So he stayed there while he got over his situation, which actually turned out to be cancer in his throat. And so, David, people in the town brought him dog food for Spanky and brought him clothes. I saw him one afternoon, and he was sitting on his mattress with the flies circling around him. And he had on red pants and orange loafers. And I said, "David, you look terrific today." And so when I left, I said, "Have a good day." He said, "How can I not have a good day looking like this?" I brought a social worker out there to talk with him, and she wanted to introduce him to Medicaid, and what it would provide for him. And he said, "Oh, give the money to the Democrats. They know how to spend it." So, you hear that? Anyway, he was a wonderful person and loved. He ended up in a motel that the Organization for Homeless People had purchased from the county, and he lived in there his way. And the caregivers that worked there were so afraid that they were going to find him dead, and because they had never dealt with that. This was all new. And I said, "Well, if you do, just call us and we come and we'll help you." They found him dead on the floor in the fetal position with nothing on but underwear. He had pajamas, he had a bed, he had everything, but he did it the way he wanted to do it. And that was really hard for people to understand, but I knew him, I loved him, and he did it his way. And the care group that cared for him, they asked me to go to Stanford Hospital had seen him, and they wanted to do surgery on his throat to remove the cancer. It was really too late for that, but they wanted to do that because they had students at Stanford that needed to operate on people. And so the man who was in charge of the daycare organization asked me if I would come, and he knew me as a hospice nurse, would I come and talk with this guy? And so I said, "Well, let me come over and talk with you about it." And he said his name, and I was like, wow, I know him. So I went and talked with David, and I told him what the procedure was going to be like. And he was like, "I don't want that. Please, I don't want that." And so we pushed back on the doctors and said no. And so he died with the tumor without being able to eat or swallow. And we gave him medication, and he wouldn't take it. He had morphine doses right in the room with him, and he wouldn't take it. So he was doing it his way. And this was written not by him, but the man who operated the place. There is a sacredness in tears. They are not the mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are messengers of overwhelming grief and unspeakable love. The cares of the world concern me no longer. I've completed this life. My work is done. I have loved much and well. To those I leave behind, I hope I will remain in their hearts as they will in mine. Thank you for taking such good care of me. And all of you who have been my friends, thank you for teaching me about life and about love. Yeah, I'm crying now, but that's okay. And this is the last thing I wanted to read, and then, people wanted to know if this was going to be 2 hours long. I'm just about winding down. So there's time for questions, or you can all run for a nap. But anyway, I really needed to read this. I need to be treated as a living human being. I need to maintain a sense of hopefulness, however changing its focus may be. The need to be cared for by those who can maintain a sense of hopefulness, however changing this may be. The need to express feelings and emotions about death in one's own way. The need to participate in decisions concerning one's care. The need to be cared for by compassionate, sensitive, knowledgeable people. The need for continuing medical care, even though the goals may change from cure to comfort. The need to have all questions answered honestly and fully. The need to seek spirituality. The need to be free of physical pain. The need to express feelings and emotions about pain in one's own way. The need of children to participate in death. The need to understand the process of death. And the need to die in peace and dignity. The need to not die alone. The need to know that the sanctity of the body will be respected after death. And that pretty much sums up, I think, what most people would like to have and would like others to know about. I'm not here to talk about advance directives and all that. Hopefully you all have considered those things and have your wishes in place. And I'm going to pop a little ad in here for the Death Cafe that I'm starting on the 1st of July at 2 o'clock down in the fireside room. And it's exactly that. Talk about death, fears, concerns, questions, whatever. You can come once, you can come every time, you can come not at all. I just want you to know that I'm there to support and we can all discuss. So, amen. Thank you.
Hello? Hello?
What is the day that you have a meeting in?
What is it that I have what?
Oh, what day do you have your meeting in the?
Oh, July 1, it's a Monday,
On
1st
Mondays?
of July. Yeah. And everyone's
It is a
invited.
new program, will be posted on your calendar and on the portal. July 1st happens to be a Monday, 2 o'clock, Fireside Parlor.
Yeah, thank you. Questions? Looks like I've answered everything. Oh,
Was it Feng Yujing, the stuff under the nose? This says Feng Yujing.
no.
In order for folks to hear, please wait.
Oh, he was just asking me about the Chinese herb.
Yeah, was it tiger balm,
No, it wasn't that either.
arnica oil?
We already did it. Feng Yujing.
Can you repeat?
It wasn't Feng Yujing.
Thang Yu Jay, no.
No? Okay.
It was just one word, but it was very Chinese.
Dragon.
Dragon, me too.
Dragon?
What happened to the lovely white-haired, blue-eyed man?
Isn't he hot?
Yes.
He finally died of cancer. He had a lot of things wrong with him. He was 11 years my senior, and the ironworkers said to him at one point, "It's a good thing you married a nurse. You'd have been dead a long time ago." I discovered he needed a pacemaker. I nursed him through prostate cancer, radiation treatment. He had quit working iron and was learning to be a inspector, going to school to be an inspector. And in the midst of school, he ended up having a stroke. And he came in the hospital where I was a nurse, and he went for rehab on the unit where I was working, which was charming, because he was Irish and very well-intended for himself and no one else when it came to therapy. Anyway, he was there for a couple of weeks and then went home, and his ironworker friend came and lived with us, and I continued to work. And he adapted. His right hand didn't work. He had difficulty speaking, which was never a problem for him prior to that. I like to say, finally, I got a word in edgewise. But he had a huge thesaurus, and so he would not be able to say a word, and he would come up with 3 other words that said what he wanted to say. A great sense of humor. And a loving man who had a son and a daughter. The son died with throat cancer the day I left California. And his daughter is still very much alive and lives in New Jersey, and I'm going to go visit her soon. But we had the best time. He taught me camping, and we camped all over, up and down the Eastern Sierras, and it was a beautiful life. And I tell people I kissed a lot of toads before I found my prince. Thank you for asking. Okay, the class may be excused then.
There's a birthday party after this.
Yeah. I was thinking of going to the tavern, but the party starts at 3, right? 3 o'clock, yes. Okay, I could get a drink before that, couldn't I?
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.